All right, if you take out your message outline for today, we are doing a series called Rerouting God's Back Roads to Joy. If you've been with us, it's a series I've been wanting to do for about a year. Finally get to do it. So what is joy? Well, we looked at in week one that joy is not the same as happiness, and joy is not the same as pleasure. These are not remotely similar things. Joy is something very, very different from happiness and joy. But in our culture, we just assume that these are all synonymous terms. And that is not true. C.S. Lewis says the great work of God is joy. That's what he's trying to lead us to eventually. And Richard talked about freedom. That's one of our words for joy that we'll look at as we get into our series. But the way to get to joy is the most convoluted way. You know, if you're going to go to LAX, you just get on the 405 and head north, right? It's easy. Except on those days when there's a SIG alert. And maybe you don't even know about it. And then you're stuck for hours or so, or road work that's done. Well, you know, we have our GPS, and you know, the GPS is rerouting. And it takes you on some back roads to get you where you want to go. Well, God is a lot like that in this life. We want to be on the 405 to get us to joy that as we define it. And God says, oh, no. I'm taking you somewhere very different. And it's not how you think you're going to get there. You're going to get there. I'm going to have to reroute you because you'll never find it on your own. So just by way of review, joy has some different definitions. It sort of has different faces of it or different expressions. So week number one, we looked at certainty. That joy sometimes is an anchor in our life where you're going through something very difficult in your life. Shattered dreams we talked about as God's back road number one. When dreams go, we go, what is God doing? I don't understand this at all. Well, he's taking you at least on a back road because he wants to take you to a place where you discover the kind of joy I think of as certainty or an anchor that anchors you in the midst of difficulty. The second we looked at last week is hunger. And joy is also a hunger. We looked at emptiness as, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I feel so empty. Well, emptiness is actually a redemptive thing. God takes you to that door, you come to that door of emptiness, and you think, what am I going to do? And God says, turn the knob. Embrace emptiness, because through that door you will find hunger, a hunger that you do not know exists in your heart for God and the things of God and to reflect him. And that we find a second kind of joy through hunger. Today we're looking at the third kind of joy, what I call belovedness. If you type it into your Word document, it will say that's a misspell. Blame it on me. Belovedness. And the reroute for this is brokenness. And again, this is one of the most unlikely ways of thinking. Why would we ever have to go through times of brokenness? The reason he's wanting to take us to the road of joy. Now, when I think about brokenness and this particular topic, I think about the topic of loneliness. And if you talk to folks or if you just think about your own heart, your own experience of loneliness, most of the time what pops up is I'm lonely because someone has failed to connect with me or love me like I want them to. That's what comes most naturally to us. And so we just assume that there must be something wrong with the other person who will not love me or will not accept me just the way I am, and that's the reason I'm lonely. Every once in a while, we may think maybe it has something to do with me, but we just kind of brush that aside. Well, that particular thinking about loneliness and the reason for loneliness does not make the Bible's top 5 reasons for loneliness. I think it's at number 6. So in your handout, you can, if you want to take some notes, there's some, why do we get lonely? And these are in order, as I see it from the Bible's point of view, why we're lonely. Loneliness, number 1. We substitute legitimate connection for what should be our number 1 connection with God. And we do this without even knowing it's happening. You do it when you get married and you go off on your honeymoon. You do it when your first child is born. You do it with your parents or big anniversary or Christmas, or we put somebody else in that top chair and expect, without even knowing it, that they are the key to me not feeling lonely. Big mistake. Number 2, our failure to live up to God's standard of loving other people. We're more concerned with how they love us God's more concerned with how are you doing at reflecting my love to people. When we fail to do that, like we should, we're going to experience loneliness again. These are the top 2 reasons for loneliness. And yet we rarely think in terms like this. Number 3, the inevitable outcome of living in a fallen world. This is not heaven. It's not the world where in heaven we're all going to be connected and there's not going to be any loneliness ever again. If you think that this world is kind of like heaven, you're in for some big disappointment. Of course we're going to feel lonely in this world. Even if you've got loneliness number 1 buttoned up really well, and even if you've got loneliness number 2 buttoned up real well, we are still going to feel some measure of loneliness because we're not home yet. Loneliness number 3. Loneliness number 4, hiding the real I from others. Now, all of us sort of have a game we play in our family and with our friends and people at work. There's a certain percentage of me that you know about. And there's a certain percentage of me that I keep covered up really well. And for some people, they have a very small percentage that they give to other people. We call them private people. They're very private. They don't give too much away about what's going on to them. And there's a lot about them they don't know. There are other people that reveal quite a bit about their life, but not the whole thing. For those of you who know me pretty well, I think I'm probably in that 70% or so. And people say, oh, Seth, you're so authentic and you tell a lot about yourself. And well, that's true, but up to a point. Up to a point. Now, the part that people don't know is the part I set myself for some level of loneliness. Because all of us have a hunger to be known. And if we clamp down or put curtain on this side of me, the inevitable result is I'm going to feel some level of loneliness. That's number 4. Number 5, chasing illegitimate connection. An affair, pornography, the internet, dating sites that I shouldn't be on are examples of this. And though it salves a certain kind of connection that I have for just a brief few moments or a few days, eventually loneliness number 5 makes the canyon greater. It deepens the chasm. This one is very pernicious. It seems to promise what my soul most needs, and it's the most devilish. Finally, we get to loneliness number 6, the one that we're all aware of, and we all think of, when others fail to connect with me. Now, when I think about loneliness here, think about this for a second. You feel lonely, and you think, why am I lonely? You're going to go to definition number 6, likely. But it could be 6. It could be 1 and 6. Or 1, 2, and 6. It's always going to be 3. There are multiple reasons why we are lonely. Loneliness is redemptive. It draws you back to God. It's as if God forces us in a way to come back to Him. Let's look on the inside of your handout at what's called the Great Commandments. Jesus said, I love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your mind, all your strength. And Mark, this is the first and greatest commandment. And I remember as a new Christian wondering, why does God tell us that this is the most important thing in all of life, to love Him? It's not because He's lonely. It's not because He needs us. It's because we need Him. We are designed in our heart for a God-shaped cavern inside. And unless He sits on the number 1 chair in your heart to fill a massive amount of your soul, you are going to be one lonely person looking for somebody to fill that canyon. And it's impossible for any one person or any group of people to do. When I think about this item of loving the Lord with all of our heart, soul, and mind and strength, He's saying this should be the number 1 love in your heart. And when I think of this, I think about a totem pole. In the Old West, when we lived in Colorado, we would drive up and see these totem poles with my family. And this totem pole has maybe 10 faces on it. But in our hearts, we have an invisible totem pole. And that totem pole has a face for everybody in your life. And we automatically, without even thinking about it, automatically rank the top one, and then number 2 and 3, 4, 5, right on down the list in order of priority. And the order has to be with the person who's most likely to meet my needs for connection. And then number 2 and number 3. Now, as life goes on and life is painful, we shuffle the faces sometimes in the hopes that somebody else can do for me what I thought somebody else was going to do. The totem pole. And God says, oh, no, 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 no. You're going to be shuffling faces all your life if you think that's how your heart works. God says there's only one face that should be at that totem pole, and God says, that's me. That's how your heart's designed, to experience that kind of love from me, and then secondly, to express that kind of love to others as the number 2 priority in your life. This is design. You may say, oh, I don't think that's really all that important. Good luck with that. The second thing, love. He says that love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on to these commandments. Now, sometimes when I'm talking to somebody about the second command and they hear love your neighbor as yourself, sometimes I'll have somebody say, well, that's a problem. Really? How come? Because I just don't love myself. Well, why is that a problem? Because if I don't love myself, how can I love somebody else? And you are running after rabbits that are going in the wrong direction. This is not what he means at all. When he says love another as you love yourself, what he's assuming is this. Every day, every one of us got up. Most of us showered. We shaved. We put on deodorant. We put on some kind of cologne. We got dressed. If you had time, you ate breakfast. You drove here, and you've had at least 1 cup of coffee. Or maybe some of us have had 4 cups of coffee. I've made sure so far today that whatever needs come to my mind, they're met. And what he's saying here is, be just as intentional with other people's needs as you are with yours. That's a high bar. And yet he says that's the number 2 command. You'll never do number 2 the way he describes it without number 1. Only God is intentional and loves my heart like that. Now, I had one of my experiences with this when I was a newlywed husband. We got married. I was 26. Mindy was 25. We were so delighted to be married to one another, and we went off for our honeymoon. And when we came back, I was like on cloud, not 9, but 99. I was so excited to be married to Mindy. She's such an amazing woman. She's still an amazing woman 40 plus years later. And I remember just being so elated and in love with her. But when the first 3 weeks we were home, I noticed that I was just sort of noticing, and ladies, I have permission to share this story. I noticed that there were just, the stupid things you hear about, I was living. Well, why didn't she put the cap on the toothpaste? Why is the soap still on the shower floor instead of not back on the soap thingy? I remember one night I was walking to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I rolled my ankle over a high heel in the dark, about 3:30 in the morning. And I knew this was all stupid, and it just bugged me to no end. Week 1 went by, week 2, I was a little bit more. I didn't say anything because I knew it was stupid. I was embarrassed about this. And at the end of week 3, she could tell something was wrong, and she drugged this out of me. And she said, Seth, I'm so sorry. Now I know, and I'll work on it. And I felt better. We started off the 4th week, and by the end of the week 4, I was doing the same thing in my head. How come the sink, blah, blah, blah. How come the dishes, blah, 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 blah. How come the bed, blah, 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 blah. Week 5 was getting worse. Week 6, she picked up something was wrong. She drugged the same junk out of me, and I was embarrassed because this is so stupid. But she said, I'll work on this. And I felt better. Weeks 7, 8, and 9, the same thing. Weeks 10, 11, 12, the same cotton picking thing. Except this time when we talked, and she drew it out of me, there were tears in her eyes. And she said, Seth, I know it may not seem like it, but I am trying to work on these things. And then she said, but I don't think you'll have peace in our marriage unless you decide to accept me just the way I am, even if I never change. Now, two thoughts went through my mind, and unfortunately, the two thoughts that went through my mind were not in the correct order. First thought was, wow, these things may never really change, and forever's a long time. That's thought one. Thought number two, I saw the tears in her eyes, and suddenly I realized I had hurt her very badly. Now, the irony of this, which still does not escape me, was that during those 3 months, if you'd asked me what kind of husband I was, I would have said, oh, I'm a great husband. I'm on it, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I love my girl. That's how it seemed to me. What I was absolutely blind to was my relational impact on her. Since then, I think, it doesn't matter if I think I'm loving. What matters is, does she think I'm loving? And if she doesn't think I'm loving, I've got some work to do. Now, she had tears in her eyes, and I could finally see this, and I just saw the ugliness in my own heart. And I had an image that came to my mind that I'd been walking around for 3 months with my notepad and my pencil. And every time she didn't do something, maybe something else she didn't do, something else she didn't do. And part of me knew it was stupid, but I had no idea that it was having an impact on her. None. Well, now there's two of us crying. And I asked God to forgive me. And I said, Mindy, I am so sorry. And I asked her to forgive me. Then I had another mental picture that came to my mind of me running in a track meet in high school. And I was running around doing the 440, running around the curve and thinking I was just doing great. And suddenly I tripped over my own shoes and went sprawling out on the track with all those cinders. And I watched everybody run right by me. And I looked at my hands and my forearms and my thighs, and I had raspberries everywhere. I thought I was a great runner, and there I was in the cinders. I thought I'd been a great husband. I'd failed completely. Now, at that moment, I felt very exposed and very ugly. And yet, to her credit, and I thought, I know she won't leave me, but she could. And I looked at her, and then I thought, no, even now, she is still, the relational impact in that moment to me was, I'm your girl. I'm with you, not going anywhere. Now, I tasted what we call around here belovedness. When you're seen for who you are in all of its ugliness, and somebody still wants to be you. The Bible calls that grace. We call it belovedness. Same thing. I was broken, but it wasn't until I was broken that I experienced belovedness. The back road is brokenness. The joy that God wants to bring us to is belovedness. Now, after that, I said, Mindy, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna work on this. I recognize it. I see it in me, and I worked on this for about a year. And I wrote down a list of 30 qualities that I admired in her, and I decided that every day I was going to tell her one of those qualities. There's something I really admire about you, honey, and I'd tell her that. Every morning when I got to pray, I would pray and thank God for her and one of those qualities. Sometimes I'd leave a note at home thanking God for one of those qualities to give to her. And I decided when I was out with my friends or at work, I was going to tell my buddies about Mindy, even if, it got old and stale. Now, all of those things were ways of what we call here at our church building, our fourth B. I was building an edifice of love. Not the emotion of love, but the edifice of love, the action of love, the thinking of love. And about 2 weeks later, I was absolutely dumbfounded, just caught completely off guard. And I had another image that came to my mind of that my heart is sort of like a love tank, the feelings of love, and that my feelings of love had sort of dwindled, the first 3 months of being married. It kind of scared me. In the 2 weeks that I was trying to build love to her, the feelings of love were coming back up. And what dumbfounded me was this. It had nothing to do with her. It had everything to do with me. What's going on between here, and what's going on in here. The back road is brokenness. The joy to come is belovedness, both with God and with people. I love the illustration of David after he commits adultery with Bathsheba and has Uriah, her husband, killed in battle. Psalm 51 we looked at a few weeks ago. And there are two great themes in this psalm. One is how David takes sin seriously, finally. But the second part of this is that he realizes that though he is broken by sin, he is not identified by sin. That is not his identity. Failure is not his identity if he goes by what God thinks and not by what he thinks. It doesn't matter what I think my identity is. You want to do that? Good luck with that. You're on for a roller coaster. Here is what God thinks. And what God thinks about me because of Jesus Christ is I am his beloved. Who else loves me like that? Nobody possibly can. Notice in Psalm 51:6. I just have some excerpts here. But notice how he thinks about his future. He's not moping around, not thinking, I'm a failure, I'm such a spiritual loser. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward being. Therefore, teach me wisdom in my secret heart. In other words, I have a future. Purge me with hyssop, I shall be clean. Wash me, I shall be whiter than snow. He's not walking around like he's got the scarlet letter on him, on his forehead. Fill me with joy and gladness. Let the bones which thou hast broken rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins. Blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. He has not disqualified himself from any of these things. Cast me not away from your presence. Take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of my salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors thy ways, and sinners will return to thee. In other words, he sees a day, not just when he's going to come moping into church, but somebody might say, hey, I want you to get up and talk. You've got something to say. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God, thou God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of thy deliverance. O Lord, open thou my lips, my mouth shall show forth thy praise, for thou hast no delight in sacrifice. Were I to give a burnt offering, thou would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Now, in your handout, this is probably the simplest fill-ins you'll ever have in our church. There's the first one, right there. Brokenness is a doorway that leads us to belovedness. Brokenness is the back road. And the joy we begin to experience is belovedness from God and as we express that to people. And here's the second fill-in, be underwhelmed. Brokenness is less than belovedness. In our church, you'll hear me say, belovedness trumps brokenness. This is joy number 3. Now, I want to finish with a very familiar story. It's the prodigal son story. But before we introduce the prodigal son story, which you've heard, I've always been sort of I've thought that we kind of forget the context of the story that Jesus tells here. It's in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. They loved to be with this guy. But the Pharisees muttered, and the Pharisees were people like me. They had their pencil and they had their pad. They just walk around every time he did something he shouldn't have done or said something he shouldn't have said, shake their head, have a sneer, feel superior. And nobody wanted to be around those people. But the tax collectors and sinners wanted to be around Jesus. And I wonder here, as we finish today's message, the phrase that I want to highlight is relational impact. The question I want to ask you is, what is your relational impact on the people in your life? The relational impact that Jesus had on the worst of people, so to speak, they wanted to be with him. The relational impact of the Pharisees, nobody wanted to be with that group. If you're married, you have a relational impact on your spouse, like I did the first 3 months, of which we are mostly blind to. Blind. The prodigal son comes to the father. And this guy is an arrogant, twit, entitled, demanding, spoiled brat. And he says, Father, what you've given me so far is not enough. I want my inheritance, the whole thing now, and I'm leaving. The inference is never coming back. He goes off. Father gives him his inheritance. He goes off. He squanders every last penny of it until he's now in the poorhouse, has no place to sleep. He's eating what the pigs eat. And he finally, as Jesus says in the story, comes to himself. Finally comes to the end of himself. And he thinks, back at the farm, even the hired hands have a place to sleep and food to eat. And here I am with the pigs. I'm going to go home. And he rehearses in his mind what he's going to tell his dad. And it's full of mopey, grumpy, I'm so sorry. I was such a failure as a son. And please take me back. And, yada, yada, yada. And the father, meantime, is over back at his house. And I have a picture in my mind. I don't think they had rocking chairs back there. But I don't care. The father's sitting in his rocking chair back and forth on his front porch. I don't know if they had front porches back then. But frankly, I don't care. He is looking across the countryside, yearning, hoping. He wants his son to come back in spite of how ugly he had been. That's belovedness. That's grace. Day comes where he thinks he sees him. I have this picture of the son walking back like this defeated, dejected, failure, why would my dad ever take me back? And the story just comes alive when the father comes. He rushes up to him. The son starts to go into his spiel. And you just hear the father say, what are you talking about? You're home. That's the point. And he throws his arm around him, puts a robe on him. He gives him the signet ring. We're going to go have a party. Wouldn't you have loved to have seen the look on that guy's face? Now, what he's experiencing there is belovedness. And he experiences it most because of his brokenness. God's strange back roads to joy. But there's an older brother in the story, and this is where I want for you to notice closely and ask yourself the question, what is the relational impact of the older brother? If you'd been living in that house, what would it have been like to relate to this guy? So he gets home, and the older brother became angry. I think the older brother was angry partly because I'm not the only one with the pencil and pad. The older brother had a pencil and pad. Became angry and refused to go into the party. Not me. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, let me give it to you straight here. All these years, I've been slaving for you. Never disobeyed your orders. Check the boxes. They're all checked. Yet, you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours couldn't even bring himself to say my brother, when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, which he did not know had happened, you kill the fattened calf for him. You hear his outrage? I've checked all the boxes. I've done all I'm supposed to do. And you pull this kind of stunt? You leave me out? You're not thinking about me or having a party for me? Think about what it would be like to live in that home. That's your older brother. Some of you know what it's like to walk around your home with somebody who carries a pencil and a pad and has that little attitude, a little sneer. Failed again. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Just like me, the first 3 months of my marriage. My son, the father said, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He's lost and is found. Now, there are 4 things that strike me about the older brother. If you're a note taker, you're trying to work on this topic we're talking about today, I'd suggest you write these 4 things down, unless you've got a great memory. Or you can go back on Facebook Live and see this. 4 things that strike me about the older brother. It was alive in me those first 3 months I was married, and probably alive in you. If God is not on that first chair, not theoretically, but practically, in the moment, then self and self-need will be preeminent. This just happens. You're probably not even aware it's going on. And number 2, what most naturally is going to happen is you are then going to try to manage your relationships in such a way that the people come through for you. As you manage the people and the relationship in you, there is a relational impact on the person, and you're going to come across as somebody, number 3, entitled. Entitled. And when those needs aren't met, number 4, you're going to find within your heart a demanding spirit. And when that doesn't work, you're just going to draw an arrow from 4 back around to 1 and start the process again. There's a better love. That better love is most seen at Calvary on a cross, where somebody not just sees you in your worst, but knows you in your worst in living color, high def. Not just things you've done, not just things you've said, not just ways you've related, even the things you've thought. And still, he died for you. Who loves you like that? Nobody can. And yet, if you say in your heart, not good enough, I got a better idea. The road of brokenness will be before you if God in his mercy takes you there. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you so much that the love that you have for us is not just a theoretical, theological kind of love, but it's a real love that wants people like us. I'm reminded of a pastor friend of mine who says, I'm an idiot, but I have a bright future, and you can join in with me. That's grace. That's belovedness. I'm an idiot, and God loves idiots. And that is what identifies me. Lord Jesus, we are your beloved. And would you turn the hearts of your people to see that, to embrace that, to hunger for that. And whatever other person we've put in that number one chair, help us to oust that person from that number one chair and let Jesus Christ sit on his rightful place where we can experience the love that you have for us. And then as the second most important thing in our life, to reflect that love to the people in our life, regardless of if they're lovable people on one extreme or knuckleheads on the other, as the second most important thing to do.